Have you ever sacrificed everything for your family, only to discover they saw you as nothing more than a wallet? This is the true-to-life story of a woman who quietly funded a dream vacation for her loved ones, only to be betrayed. To respect the privacy of those involved, I've changed their names and locations, but the emotions and events are real. So lean in, listen closely, and follow the twists as they unfold. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our newest stories. Hit like and comment "I'm listening" so we can stay connected on this journey together. It was a bright, warm Saturday morning in Boston, the kind of summer day that smelled faintly of salt from the harbor and fresh coffee from the cafes lining the street. Inside the Beacon Harbor Hotel, sunlight streamed through two-story windows, scattering across the polished marble floors and climbing up the brass railings of the grand staircase. At 11 a.m., Linda Parker stood alone near the check-in desk, her hands gently resting on the handle of a worn leather suitcase. She was 62 now, a retired elementary school teacher from Dorchester. Years of managing noisy classrooms had taught her patience, but patience could not dull the sting in her chest at that moment. She watched her two sons, Matthew, 35, a software engineer living in Cambridge, and Daniel, 33, who managed a busy restaurant in Quincy, laughing with their wives and children as they maneuvered their luggage toward the elevators. The group looked like a travel brochure, colorful tote bags, sun hats, children tugging on their parents' hands in excitement. Not one of them glanced back. Linda shifted her weight, the air conditioning brushing her bare arms, and tried to steady her breathing. Then she heard it, sharp and unmistakable. Finally free of her, Sarah's voice rang out, just loud enough to reach Linda's ears. Sarah was Daniel's wife, impeccably dressed in white linen, a phone in her hand. A few muffled giggles followed from the others. The words floated in the air like a sour smell, settling on Linda's skin. She froze, fingers tightening on the suitcase handle until her knuckles whitened. She felt as if the room tilted slightly, the cheerful buzz of other guests checking in and out fading into a low hum. For a moment, she stared at the elevators, at the blinking numbers climbing upward. Inside, her sons and their families were chatting about pool times, dinner reservations, maybe even mocking her. Finally free of her. Linda swallowed hard, but her throat felt dry. She wanted to call out, "Wait," or "What did you say?" But instead, she pressed her lips together. Years of holding back in parent-teacher conferences, years of swallowing her pride to keep peace at home had trained her well. She simply stood there, heart hammering. Her mind raced back over the past 10 months, waking up at 4 each morning in her small Dorchester kitchen to knead dough for the pies she sold at the farmer's market, tutoring neighborhood kids after school for a few extra dollars, quietly slipping every bill into an old Twinings tea tin hidden behind the sugar canister. She had counted each dollar, imagining her family's delighted faces on this special trip. "They don't know," she whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer. "They don't know a thing." She adjusted the strap of her bag and squared her shoulders. To any bystander she was just another hotel guest, but inside, something was shifting. She had paid for every room. She had orchestrated every detail. And now, standing in the cool marble lobby of the Beacon Harbor with the Charles River glinting outside, Linda realized no one, not her sons, not their wives, had the faintest idea what she was thinking. It was 3 weeks earlier, on a soft June afternoon, when the call that would change everything came. The sun slanted across Dorchester's quiet streets, lighting up the front gardens of small red brick houses. Linda Parker was in her yard, wearing her old denim apron and a wide straw hat, carefully watering the geraniums she'd planted along the white picket fence. The scent of wet earth rose as she moved the hose from one pot to another. Her back ached slightly, 62 years of life and months of side jobs would do that, but she felt calm, lost in the rhythm of tending her plants. Then her cell phone rang from the kitchen window, that tinny tune her sons had always teased her about. She wiped her hands on the apron, walked inside, and picked it up. "Mom, it's me, Matthew," came the warm, practiced voice on the other end. Linda smiled automatically. Even after all these years, her eldest son's voice still carried a hint of the boy who used to build Lego cities on her living room floor. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, leaning against the counter. "Everything okay?" I was just thinking, Matthew began, and she could almost picture him at his standing desk in Cambridge, his Bluetooth headset on, glancing at his calendar. It's been so long since we've all been together. What do you think about a family trip this summer? Like old times. Linda's heart fluttered. For a moment she stopped fiddling with the hem of her apron. She hadn't been invited on any vacation with her children in over 5 years. A trip, she repeated softly, like testing a fragile word on her tongue. Yeah, Matthew said enthusiastically. I found this amazing hotel right on the Charles River, Beacon Harbor. It's got an indoor pool, a rooftop restaurant with the best city views, and even programs for the kids. Mom, you'd love it. We could all relax for once. Linda walked over to the window and watched a young couple pass by on the sidewalk, their toddler chasing a pigeon. She could feel her throat tighten. She had dreamed of something like this, being included, not just as a caretaker but as part of the family again. That sounds wonderful, she murmured, brushing a stray gray curl behind her ear. Matthew chuckled on the other end, that easy laugh he used when he wanted something. So, listen. The hotel needs one name on the reservation. Why don't you handle the booking, Mom? It'll be simpler. We'll transfer you our share right after. Linda turned to look at the tea tin on her shelf where she'd been slipping away spare bills from tutoring and baking. She didn't hesitate. Of course, honey. I can do that. Great, Matthew said. This is going to be perfect. The kids will be thrilled. You'll see, Mom, we'll all have a real family vacation. As she hung up, Linda held the phone a moment longer, staring at the dark screen. Her hands trembled slightly, but there was a smile spreading across her face. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. She thought, perhaps, this was her chance to stitch the family back together, 1 week by the river. That same afternoon, after Matthew's call had filled her with a fragile kind of hope, Linda sat down at her small oak kitchen table in Dorchester with a cup of lukewarm tea. She dialed the number for the Beacon Harbor Hotel, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed each button. Outside, the late-day sun slanted through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the worn linoleum floor. She could hear the hum of traffic on Adams Street and the laughter of neighborhood kids playing jump rope on the sidewalk. A polite female voice answered. Good afternoon, Beacon Harbor Hotel, this is Melissa speaking. How can I assist you? Linda cleared her throat. Hello, yes. I'd like to inquire about booking for a family vacation. 5 family suites, for 7 nights. She felt oddly formal, like she was back at a school meeting. Certainly, ma'am, Melissa replied, her tone brisk but pleasant. 5 family suites for 7 nights, let me check. The sound of typing drifted over the line, punctuated by the faint clicking of hotel software. All right, we can accommodate that. The total will come to $5,000, with a deposit of $2,500 required today to secure the rooms. Linda's breath caught. 5,000, she repeated softly. Her pension was only $1,100 a month. 10 months of tutoring neighborhood children and selling pies at the farmer's market had gotten her just over $2,500, money she had been so proud to squirrel away into an old tea tin. I'm sorry, Melissa continued, not unkindly. We require half the payment up front for a booking of that size. Can I take your card now? Linda glanced at the tin sitting on the kitchen counter, its lid slightly askew from the last time she had counted the bills. Her thumb rubbed at a spot on the tabletop as she did quick mental math. I'll call you back shortly, she said, her voice steady but quiet. That night, she sat in her creaky rocking chair by the window, staring out at the quiet street. The streetlight flickered, and a stray cat padded across the pavement. She held a yellow notepad on her lap, scribbling numbers, crossing them out, starting over. Her heart ached, not from the money itself, but from the sacrifices it represented. In the jewelry box on her dresser lay the last thing of value she owned, a simple gold ring with a tiny diamond, the one Henry had slipped on her finger 40 years ago. By morning, Linda had made her decision. She dressed in her neatest blouse, pulled on a cardigan, and walked the 3 blocks to Collins Pawn and Jewelry on Adams Street. The bell over the door jingled as she stepped inside, the smell of metal and polish filling her nose. Mr. Collins, a graying man with kind eyes, looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Mrs. Parker," he said. "What can I do for you?" Linda opened her palm to reveal the ring. "I need to pawn this." He picked it up delicately, examining it under the light. "It's a lovely piece." "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, her eyes fixed on a spot beyond the counter. "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "I can give you 1,000 for it." "That will be fine," Linda whispered. By late afternoon, she was back at her kitchen table, receipt from the pawn shop in her purse, entering her card details over the phone to the hotel receptionist. 2,500 to secure the rooms, Melissa repeated. "Yes," Linda said. "Please confirm the reservation." As she hung up, she looked down at her empty ring finger. The skin was pale where the band had sat for decades. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "It's worth it. For them. For us." After making the deposit, Linda threw herself even harder into her side jobs, as if each hour of extra work was a brick building the dream of that family vacation. 3 afternoons a week, she sat at her small dining table under a flickering overhead light, tutoring neighborhood children in math. The walls of her apartment in Dorchester were lined with old teaching posters she'd never taken down after retiring, multiplication tables, colorful fractions charts, and the kids would giggle at the stickers she still handed out when they got an answer right. "Miss Parker, is this how you solve it?" a little boy named Kevin asked one evening, pencil hovering nervously over a worksheet. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, gently sliding his paper back. "Carry the one and try again. You'll see, it works." Her voice stayed calm even when she was tired. Teaching was second nature, like breathing. On Fridays and Saturdays, before the sun rose, she was already in her small kitchen, rolling out dough for pies. The counters would be dusted in flour, her old radio playing soft jazz from WGBH as she chopped apples and stirred cinnamon into the filling. By 8 a.m. she was at the Dorchester Farmers Market with a folding table, neat rows of pies cooling under a tent. She'd smile at regular customers, even when her back ached from carrying crates. 2 for $10 today, she'd call out, her cheeks pink from the morning chill. She cut every personal expense she could. No more Starbucks lattes, she brewed coffee at home and carried it in a dented thermos. She stopped calling Ubers and instead took the MBTA, waiting on windy platforms with a tote bag of books for tutoring. When she felt her resolve waver, she would whisper to herself, "Just a few more months, Linda. This will all be worth it." Each night she opened a small blue notebook she kept in her bedside drawer. In neat handwriting, she wrote down the day's earnings and taped in receipts. On the inside cover was a faded photo of Matthew and Daniel as children, standing in front of the Boston Public Garden swan boats, hair sticking up from the wind. She would run her finger over their faces before closing the book. One evening Matthew called, his voice casual. "Hey Mom, should I pack swim trunks? Do they even have a pool?" Linda chuckled, wiping flour from her hands. "Yes, sweetheart. The pool is beautiful. Bring something nice to wear for dinner, too." He didn't mention money, not once. None of them did. She started setting aside little treats, homemade cookies in plastic tubs, coloring books she found on sale, for her grandchildren to enjoy on the trip. It was her secret joy, imagining their faces when she handed them out. On the night before departure, after packing her neat, modest suitcase, she sat on the edge of her bed with her credit card in hand. With a deep breath, she paid the remaining balance online, watching the screen flash payment successful. She exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and anticipation washing over her. 7 days of happiness, she whispered into the quiet room. "It's worth it." Saturday dawned pale and cool over Dorchester, the kind of summer morning when the neighborhood still felt half asleep. At 5 a.m., Linda Parker's alarm chimed softly on her nightstand. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms to her knees to steady herself. Today was the day. For a few seconds she simply listened, the distant hum of a garbage truck, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the faint rattle of the MBTA trains beginning their morning runs. She opened her closet and reached for the dress she had chosen the night before, a faded floral print Henry had once told her made her look too young to be a grandmother. She smoothed it out carefully, running her fingers over the fabric as if touching an old memory. Around her neck she clasped her mother's delicate pearl necklace, its clasp slightly stiff from years in a jewelry box. When she looked in the mirror, her hair was silver now, but her eyes were bright with a mixture of hope and nerves. "Let's make this work," she whispered to her reflection. By 7, a deep rumble outside announced Daniel's SUV pulling up to the curb. Linda gathered her small, neatly packed suitcase, double-checked that she had the treats for the grandchildren in her tote, and locked the door. Stepping out into the cool morning air, she smiled at the sight of the car, at her son's silhouette behind the wheel. "Good morning," she said brightly, walking down the steps. Sarah, seated in the passenger seat, didn't lift her eyes from her phone, thumbs flying across the screen. In the back, 9-year-old Emily and 6-year-old Jacob sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by the glow of their iPads. Linda opened the back door and slid in next to them, the scent of new leather mingling with the faint smell of fast food wrappers from an earlier trip. "Hi, sweethearts," she said, her voice soft. "Are you excited about the boat rides? They have a big one right on the river." Emily gave a distracted without looking up. Jacob made a small noise that might have been agreement, his fingers still tapping at a game. Linda folded her hands in her lap, forcing a smile. "Well, you'll see. It's going to be wonderful," she said quietly. The drive toward the Beacon Harbor Hotel was long enough for the children to finish a game level and for Sarah to make several phone calls. Linda watched the scenery change from Dorchester's brick row houses to the sleek glass buildings lining the Charles River. She tried a few more times to start conversation, asking Daniel about his restaurant, complimenting Sarah's new haircut, but her questions were met with curt answers. When they finally pulled under the hotel's elegant awning, Matthew was already there waiting. He raised a hand in greeting but didn't come closer, his phone still in his other hand. "Hi, Mom," he called, his tone rushed. No hug, no kiss on the cheek. Linda drew a deep breath, telling herself, they're just busy. It's early. They're tired. She stepped out of the SUV, the marble steps of the hotel glistening ahead, and squared her shoulders. In her heart a flicker of hope still glowed, a week together, meals by the water, laughter with the grandchildren. She clutched the handle of her suitcase a little tighter. This is our chance, she thought. This will be the week we become a family again. The Beacon Harbor Hotel rose over the Charles River like a gleaming palace, its white facade catching the late morning sun. As the automatic glass doors slid open, a cool gust of air conditioning swept over Linda Parker, carrying the faint scent of lilies from a floral arrangement in the lobby. She paused for a moment at the threshold, her suitcase handle in one hand, her tote bag with homemade pies in the other, and simply stared. The lobby was even more breathtaking than the glossy photos she'd seen online. Marble floors stretched out like a chessboard, polished to a mirror finish. Towering columns framed the space, their capitals carved with intricate leaf patterns. Above, a massive crystal chandelier caught the light and scattered it into hundreds of tiny rainbows across the ceiling. Staff members in crisp navy uniforms moved efficiently behind a long mahogany reception desk, their smiles professional and warm. Wow, Linda whispered, her voice catching a little. I've never stayed anywhere like this before. She turned to Matthew, who was standing a few feet away checking something on his phone. Yeah, it's nice, huh? He said without looking up, his tone polite but distracted. Then he added with a half smile, pretty fancy for us. Linda chuckled softly, brushing a strand of silver hair behind her ear. It's beautiful, she said again, more to herself than to anyone. Her heart fluttered with the small thrill of seeing her family in such a place, her sons, their wives, and her grandchildren, all together, like a picture from a magazine. While she lingered near the reception desk, the others surged ahead. Daniel was hauling 2 large suitcases, Sarah gliding alongside him, her designer sunglasses still perched on her head. They didn't wait. Their voices carried across the lobby as they hurried toward the elevators. Only 9-year-old Emily broke from the pack, her little sandals tapping across the marble. "Grandma!" Emily squealed, wrapping her arms around Linda's waist. "Can we go to the pool together later? Please?" Linda bent down, the smell of chlorine from Emily's damp hairband already making her smile. "Of course we can," she said, smoothing the child's curls back. "I brought your favorite floaties, remember?" Emily's eyes lit up. "You did? Yay!" She darted back toward the elevators, leaving Linda with a warm ache in her chest. Turning back to the reception desk, Linda handed over her ID to the clerk. The young woman tapped briskly at her keyboard, then slid a packet of keycards across the counter. "Here are the keys for all 5 suites, Mrs. Parker." "Welcome to Beacon Harbor," she said cheerfully. Just as Linda reached for the cards, a low voice drifted from a few feet away, Sarah's, pitched in a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the lobby hum. "At least this week we won't have to listen to her complaints." A quick, mean little laugh followed. Linda froze, her fingers tightening on the keycards. She stared down at the marble floor, its veining suddenly swimming in her vision. For a heartbeat she couldn't breathe. She forced her lips into what she hoped looked like a smile and turned toward the elevators. "Everything's fine," she murmured under her breath, though something deep inside her felt as if it had splintered. She walked slowly across the vast lobby, her heels clicking softly, each step echoing in her ears. The chandelier still sparkled overhead, but to her it seemed colder now, almost mocking. She clutched the keys tighter, drawing in a deep breath. "Hold it together," she told herself. "Just hold it together." From somewhere above came the faint sound of her family's laughter, rising up the elevator shaft. That afternoon, the sunlight slanted low across the Charles River, casting golden ripples onto the hotel's turquoise pool. Linda sat on the small balcony of her suite on the 4th floor, a mug of lukewarm tea cradled in her hands. Below, she could see her family gathered at the cabanas, Matthew in his sunglasses, Daniel with a cocktail in hand, Sarah and her sister-in-law snapping photos for social media. The children splashed and shrieked in the shallow end. Waiters in white uniforms glided back and forth with trays of frozen drinks and shrimp cocktails. From up here it all looked like a glossy advertisement for the perfect family holiday. But Linda's stomach twisted with unease. She pressed her fingers into the ceramic mug, trying to anchor herself. For weeks she had imagined sitting poolside with her grandkids, teaching them to float, maybe laughing with her sons over old memories. Yet they hadn't even invited her down. Maybe later, she had told herself. They're just settling in. But as she watched them laughing without her, a small crack opened wider inside her chest. A soft knock startled her. "Grandma?" Emily's voice was muffled through the door. Linda stood quickly, setting the mug aside and smoothing her dress. When she opened the door, Emily stood there barefoot, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks, clutching an iPad against her chest. Her eyes were wide with something beyond a child's usual mischief. "Sweetheart, what is it?" Linda asked gently, kneeling down so their faces were level. Emily bit her lip. "Grandma, please don't get mad, okay? I think you should see this." She held out the iPad with trembling hands. On the screen was a group chat titled Summer Freedom. The profile pictures were all too familiar, Matthew's, Daniel's, Sarah's, and a few of their friends. Linda's breath caught as she scrolled. Message after message appeared, green bubbles filled with words she wished she hadn't read. "Let the old lady cover it all, we're set for the week. Once she checks in, we'll figure out how to transfer the room rights. No nagging this week, thank God." Her fingers went cold. She could hear her own heartbeat like a drum in her ears. "When did you see this, honey?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This morning," Emily said softly. Mom left her phone open. "I saw the same chat on there. I thought you should know." I don't think it's fair. Linda reached out and pulled the little girl into a hug. The scent of chlorine and sunscreen filled her nose. Thank you for telling me, Emily, she murmured, stroking her granddaughter's back. You're very brave. When Emily finally slipped back out to the hallway, Linda closed the door slowly and leaned against it, eyes shut. The muffled sounds of laughter drifted up from the pool, but they seemed far away now. Something inside her had shifted. The ache of betrayal was still there, but layered under it was a strange, cool clarity, like a window opening in a stuffy room. She wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and set the iPad down on the desk. They think I'm just a wallet, she whispered to the empty room. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Her reflection in the dark TV screen looked back at her, not the soft, eager mother she had been this morning, but someone steadier, sharper. She drew a long breath, and for the first time since arriving at Beacon Harbor, Linda felt not defeated, but awake. That night, the Beacon Harbor lobby buzzed with the chatter of weekend guests heading to dinner. Downstairs, Linda's family had gathered at the hotel's waterfront restaurant for seafood and cocktails, their laughter drifting faintly up through the open courtyard. From her fourth-floor room, Linda could see them through the glass, Matthew gesturing animatedly about something on his phone, Daniel lifting his wineglass, Sarah snapping a picture of the table for Instagram. The scene looked warm and festive from afar, but to Linda it felt like watching strangers through a shop window. She stayed behind on purpose. After Emily's confession and the summer freedom chat, Linda felt an icy composure settle over her. Enough waiting, she whispered to herself, setting aside the dinner invitation card she'd been clutching. She moved to the small desk in the corner of the room and opened her battered old Dell laptop, the same one she'd used to tutor kids in math. The screen flickered to life, its keys worn smooth from years of use. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed the number on the back of her credit card. "Hello, this is Linda Parker," she said when the automated system transferred her to a live agent. "I need to report a potential fraud risk. My family may be attempting to dispute charges on a reservation I paid for. Can you place a temporary alert on my account?" The woman on the other end spoke gently, confirming her details. "Yes, Mrs. Parker, we can flag the account and send you a confirmation email. Any dispute attempts will be blocked pending your approval." "Thank you," Linda murmured, exhaling a long breath when she hung up. One step done. Next, she opened her email and composed a message to Robert Kane, a lawyer she'd known for years in Quincy, the man who had helped her handle Henry's estate after his passing. She typed carefully, "Dear Robert, I'm at Beacon Harbor Hotel. There may be an attempt by my family to take control of a reservation I paid for. I don't want to sue them, but I need to protect myself. Could you advise?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came less than 10 minutes later. Her phone rang, and she answered quickly. "Linda, it's Robert. You don't have to explain, just email me the reservation details and the messages your granddaughter showed you. We can draw up a statement to ensure the hotel recognizes you as the sole payee." Linda closed her eyes, relief and resolve mingling. "Thank you, Robert. I'm tired of being the one they count on and then ignore." Before shutting down her laptop, she made one more call to the hotel management. A receptionist transferred her to Olivia Brown, the operations manager. Olivia's voice was warm, with a soft Texas drawl. "Mrs. Parker, how can I help?" "I'd like to meet tomorrow morning," Linda said steadily. "There are some issues with my reservation I need to clarify privately." "No problem at all, ma'am," Olivia replied. "Come by my office at 9 a.m. We'll take care of you." When Linda hung up, she walked to the balcony again. Down below, her family clinked glasses under the string lights, oblivious to her plans. She wrapped her arms around herself, the night breeze cool against her skin. "Tomorrow," she whispered into the dark. "Tomorrow, everything will change." The next morning, a pale pink dawn crept over Boston, softening the skyline beyond the Charles River. At precisely 5 a.m., Linda Parker's eyes opened without the help of an alarm. For years, rising early had been her habit, from tutoring children before school or baking pies for the farmer's market, but today felt different. She swung her legs out of bed, feeling the cool carpet beneath her feet. Instead of the heavy exhaustion that usually accompanied early mornings, there was a strange, bright current running through her veins. In the bathroom mirror, she saw the faintest tremor in her hands as she brushed her hair. She took a slow breath, smoothing the collar of the navy blue suit she had laid out the night before. It was the same suit she had worn to her master's graduation at Boston University 20 years ago, an outfit Henry had once called her armor. She straightened the lapels, dabbed a touch of powder on her face, and whispered to herself, "Today, you stop being the background character." By 6:30, the hotel's restaurant was nearly empty. Only two businessmen in suits sat by the window, murmuring over laptops. The soft jazz playing from hidden speakers mingled with the smell of fresh-baked pastries and coffee. Linda chose a corner table with a clear view of the lobby doors. She placed her leather notebook beside her cup and tried to calm her racing heart. Downstairs, her family would still be asleep after their late dinner and wine. She had time. The elevator chimed softly, and Olivia Brown appeared. At 42, Olivia carried herself with the ease of someone who had solved hundreds of guest problems. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and a badge with Operations Manager glinted under the overhead lights. She spotted Linda immediately and crossed the room with a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker." "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her Texas lilt softening the formal greeting. Linda rose and extended her hand. "Very well, thank you, Ms. Brown. I was hoping we could speak somewhere private?" "Of course." "Let's go to my office," Olivia said warmly, gesturing toward the hallway. They walked together past framed sepia photographs of old Boston, the harbor in the 1920s, the State House under construction. Linda's heels clicked steadily on the polished floor. She felt her back straighten, her breathing deepen. Olivia's office overlooked the Charles, morning sunlight glinting off the rippling water. On a sideboard stood a silver coffee pot and two porcelain cups. "Please, have a seat," Olivia said, pouring coffee for them both. "We've reviewed your case with our legal department, as you requested." Linda sat upright in the leather chair, placing her hands deliberately on the table. The smell of strong coffee filled her nose, but she didn't drink. Her eyes were clear and steady now, like someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks. "I appreciate that, Ms. Brown," she said quietly but firmly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to take back control." Olivia nodded once, her expression respectful. "Then let's make sure you have exactly that, Mrs. Parker." Linda exhaled slowly. The morning light glimmered off the river and onto the office walls, and for the first time since the trip began, she felt the day belonged to her. Olivia Brown sat down opposite Linda, a thick beige folder in her hands. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of the HVAC and the distant cry of a gull over the Charles. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling window, glinting off the river and spilling across the desk where 2 cups of coffee steamed gently. Olivia opened the folder with practiced precision. "Mrs. Parker," she began, her Texas accent softened but clear, "you're listed as the sole payer for all 5 suites. Can you confirm that?" Linda sat straighter in the leather chair, folding her hands in her lap. "Yes. Every dollar came from me," she said quietly, but there was a steadiness in her voice now that hadn't been there the day before. "And you mentioned evidence that your family may be trying to dispute the charges?" Olivia asked, looking up from the documents. Linda reached into her tote and produced Emily's iPad, now wrapped carefully in a dish towel to protect it. She tapped the screen and turned it toward Olivia. "Here. Screenshots from a group chat they call Summer Freedom. They're talking about transferring the room rights after I checked in." Her fingers trembled slightly as she spoke. They see me as a bank, not as family." Olivia's expression didn't change, but she gave a small, sympathetic nod. She pulled out 2 papers from the folder and laid them flat on the desk. "We anticipated this might happen. Here's what we've prepared." She slid the first document forward. This is a formal confirmation from our legal department that you, Mrs. Parker, are the only person responsible for and entitled to this reservation. Linda skimmed the heading, her eyes catching the bold sole pay, sole rights. And this, Olivia continued, placing the second paper beside the first, is an addendum to your reservation. It gives you full discretion to modify or cancel any of the rooms at any time, to change occupants, or to request that anyone not listed under your permission vacate the property. We've also flagged your account so no changes can be made without your signature. Linda's hands hovered over the papers. Does this mean, she began, her voice almost a whisper, I can ask them to leave if I need to? Completely legal, Olivia said gently. The hotel will back you up. You're our client, Mrs. Parker. They're your guests only by your grace. For a moment Linda just stared at the documents, the letters blurring as her heart thudded in her chest. She glanced out the window at the Charles River, sunlight dancing on the ripples like tiny shards of glass. Down below, she could see the terrace where her family would soon come for breakfast, unaware of the shift happening upstairs. She inhaled slowly, the smell of strong coffee grounding her. I never thought I'd have this kind of power, she murmured, almost to herself. Then, louder, with a clarity that surprised even her, thank you, Ms. Brown. You've given me back my voice. Olivia offered her a small smile. Sometimes people forget who's really holding the keys, she said. Linda folded the papers neatly and slipped them into her notebook. As she rose to leave, a plan, sharp and unmistakable, was already forming in her mind, as clear as the river sparkling below. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee when Olivia closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Outside the window, the Charles River glimmered like a sheet of silver under the rising sun. Linda Parker sat across from her, her notebook open and a pen poised between her fingers. Her heart was hammering, but her face remained calm, composed. So, she said quietly, what time is checkout here? Olivia glanced at her calendar. Officially, noon, she replied, her Texas drawl warm and measured. But we're flexible for special circumstances. Linda nodded, taking a deep breath. And if I wanted to cancel 4 of the 5 suites on this reservation, leaving only 1 active, what would I need to do? You'd simply sign here, Olivia said, sliding a cancellation form across the desk. We can lock their keycards, reassign the rooms, even have staff inform them. It's all within your rights. Linda stared at the paper for a long moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the pen, but there was a steel in her eyes now. 10 o'clock, she said, her voice firm but low. Lock their keycards at 10. At 11, have your staff notify them in person. And one more thing, anyone who wants to see me must speak respectfully. If not, we'll call security, Olivia finished gently, already making notes. Linda exhaled, a shaky but determined breath. Good. I don't want a scene. I just want to draw a line. Olivia paused, studying the older woman. May I ask what brought you to this point? She said softly. Linda's lips curved into a small, sad smile. 30 years teaching children in Dorchester. Raising 2 boys alone after my husband died. Baking pies at dawn, tutoring at night. Sacrificing every holiday and vacation so they could have more than I ever did. And now, she gestured vaguely toward the window, where her family's voices drifted up faintly from the pool deck. Now I'm treated like a wallet with feet. For a moment Olivia was silent. Then she said, Mrs. Parker, you have every right to protect yourself. We'll support you all the way. Linda signed her name slowly but firmly on the form. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was strangely satisfying, like the closing of a door. She slid the signed documents back across the desk. There, she murmured. No going back now. Olivia gathered the papers, her expression respectful. We'll have everything ready, Mrs. Parker. At 10 o'clock sharp, the keycards will be deactivated. At 11, staff will inform your guests. Do you need us to arrange transportation for anyone? Not yet, Linda said, standing. Her knees felt steady under her for the first time in days. She glanced once more at the river sparkling beyond the glass. Let's just see how they react. Olivia rose as well. You're stronger than you think, she said quietly. Linda managed a small, wry smile. I'm starting to believe that, she replied. Then she picked up her notebook, straightened her jacket, and walked out of the office with the poise of someone who had finally remembered her own worth. At 8:30 a.m., Linda slipped her keycard into the lock and stepped back into her suite. The cool blast of air conditioning brushed her cheeks as the heavy door closed behind her with a soft click. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the hotel's cleaning service. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, spilling across the navy carpet like liquid gold. Down below, through the glass, she could see the breakfast terrace by the pool, white parasols open like giant flowers, waiters weaving between tables carrying plates of pancakes and fresh orange juice. Somewhere out there, her sons and their wives were laughing, planning a day of indulgence. She set her bag on the armchair, smoothed her skirt, and called room service. "One black coffee, please," she said softly. Her voice felt steadier than she expected. As she hung up the phone, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time, she murmured to herself, "I'm the one in control." Linda walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside with 2 fingers. She could make out Matthew at a table near the railing, gesturing animatedly to Daniel. Sarah and Lily were leaning in, whispering. Emily and Jacob were running circles around a palm tree, squealing with the carefree energy of children. The sight made her heart pinch. She still loved them all, but she couldn't unsee the messages, the contempt. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emily popped up on the screen. "Grandma, they're talking about going to the front desk to take the room keys." "What should I do?" Linda's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second before she typed back, "Just play normally, sweetheart. Don't let them know anything. Grandma's got this." Almost immediately, another notification arrived. This one from Matthew. "Mom, aren't you coming down for breakfast?" Linda's thumbs moved slowly, deliberately. "No thanks, honey. I have my own plans today." 3 little dots blinked on the screen, then his reply came. "Plans? What plans?" She allowed herself a faint smile as she typed, "You'll see." Setting the phone aside, she crossed to the desk and opened her small leather notebook. Inside were scribbled notes from her meeting with Olivia, times, room numbers, contingency instructions. She read them over one more time, her pulse steady but strong, like a drumbeat before a race. At 9:55 a.m., Linda glanced at her wristwatch. The second hand swept around the dial with quiet insistence. 5 minutes left. Her heart fluttered, but instead of fear she felt an almost serene anticipation, like the hush before a symphony begins. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup of coffee the waiter had just delivered, inhaling its bitter steam. 5 more minutes, she whispered to the empty room. And then the game ends. Outside, a breeze rippled the blue surface of the pool. The breakfast terrace buzzed with chatter, unaware that a silent countdown had begun in the suite above. Linda straightened her back, smoothed the papers on the desk, and fixed her gaze on the clock. For the first time in decades, she wasn't waiting for her family to decide what would happen next. She was about to decide it for herself. Exactly at 10 a.m., the plan that Linda had etched in her notebook the night before came alive. Somewhere in the bowels of the Beacon Harbor Hotel, a quiet click in the computer system rendered 4 family keycards useless. In her suite, the only sound was the steady tick of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the air conditioning. Linda sat by the window with her cup of black coffee, her hands wrapped tightly around it. She stared at her phone screen, waiting. Her pulse was steady but her palms were damp. A notification blinked. It was Emily. The girl had been her secret ally for days now. She had sent a screenshot from the Summer Freedom group chat. "At lunch we go to the desk to get control of the rooms." Linda zoomed in on the text, her mouth tightening but her eyes calm. So they really thought I wouldn't see this, she murmured to herself. She took a slow sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding her. Down below, the hotel's pool deck was beginning to fill with voices and splashes. Linda watched through the glass as Sarah excused herself from the table, slipped on her cover-up, and headed toward the elevators. 10:07, Linda knew exactly what Sarah was trying to do, get back to her room to grab something. She set her cup down and crossed her legs, a small smile playing on her lips. 4 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Emily had texted, "Grandma, Mom is yelling at the front desk. She says her card won't work." Linda chuckled softly, a sound halfway between relief and sadness. "Here we go," she whispered. She typed back, "Stay calm, sweetheart. Just keep playing. Grandma's handling it." At 10:20, the screen lit up with Matthew's name. She let it ring twice before answering. His voice was tight but trying to sound controlled. "Mom, there's a problem with the rooms. The keycards aren't working. Can you come down to help us fix it?" Linda adjusted her glasses and kept her tone neutral. "That's strange. Are you sure no one changed anything?" "I'm sure," Matthew said, his voice sharpening. "Mom, can you come? The kids want to get back to the rooms." "I'm busy with something important right now," Linda replied, almost gently. "I'm sure it'll sort itself out soon." Before he could answer, she ended the call, laying the phone face down on the table. For a long moment she stared at the river beyond the window. The minutes ticked by. She could picture the scene downstairs, Matthew frowning at the reception desk, Sarah raising her voice, Daniel pacing. At 10:45 Emily's message arrived, "Grandma, the manager is talking to Dad and Uncle. They look really stressed." Linda inhaled deeply and straightened her shoulders. The first domino had fallen. The machine she had set in motion was working exactly as she'd planned. She took one last sip of coffee, savoring the heat, then set the cup down with a soft clink. "All right," she whispered to the empty room. "Time for the last move." At 10:58 a.m., the phone on the nightstand vibrated so hard it rattled against the wood. Linda let it ring twice before lifting it to her ear. Daniel's voice came through, sharp and incredulous. "Mom, the front desk says you canceled the rooms. Tell me it's a mistake. Tell me they're wrong." Linda shifted her weight, staring out at the Charles River glinting in the late morning sun. "A mistake?" she repeated softly. "Yes." Daniel's voice cracked. "There's no reason for you to do this." "Why would you do that, Mom?" She let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of every year, every sacrifice. Finally, she said evenly, "I met with Olivia this morning." There was a beat of stunned quiet on the line. You actually canceled them?" "Yes," she said, her voice calm but steady. "Why?" Daniel demanded, his tone a mixture of disbelief and anger. Linda closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Because I can." She ended the call before he could respond. For a moment she simply stood there, phone in hand, listening to the muffled sounds of splashing and chatter drifting up from the pool deck. Her pulse felt like a drum in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something closer to relief, even a strange clarity. At exactly 11 a.m., Linda stepped onto the balcony. From her vantage point she saw Olivia, impeccably dressed in a cream blazer, walking toward the pool with a young service manager and a hotel security officer in tow. The trio moved with quiet authority, approaching the table where Matthew, Sarah, and Daniel sat. Linda could see Matthew stand, gesturing wildly, Sarah pressing a hand to her forehead, Daniel pacing. Their faces shifted from confusion to anger as Olivia spoke to them, her voice low but firm. Guests at nearby tables began to glance over, sensing the tension. Linda gripped the balcony railing, her knuckles pale. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways, but nothing compared to actually watching it happen, her grown children suddenly powerless, having to face the reality she'd hidden for months. She whispered to herself, "This is the line. This is where it changes." At 11:05, a loud knock thundered at her door. Not one polite tap but a series of urgent, almost frantic blows. Linda set her coffee cup down, smoothed the front of her jacket, and walked to the door. Her heartbeat was steady now, like a slow drumroll. When she opened it, they were all there: Matthew, Daniel, Sarah, and little Emily clinging to her father's leg. Their expressions were a storm of emotions: anger in Matthew's eyes, hurt in Daniel's, defiance in Sarah's tight mouth, and confusion and fear on Emily's small face. The hallway smelled faintly of chlorine and sunblock drifting up from the pool. Linda stood straight in the doorway, her hand still on the knob, and said quietly, "Come in. We should talk." The words hung in the air like the opening note of a long-delayed symphony. The door clicked shut behind them with a muted thud, sealing the five of them inside the suite. The air felt heavy, charged, as if even the walls knew a reckoning had arrived. Linda stood near the small round table by the window, her back straight, her hands calmly folded. Sunlight from the Charles River poured across the carpet, glinting off her coffee cup. Sarah was the first to break the silence. Her voice was sharp, high-pitched. "What on earth is going on here?" she demanded, throwing up her hands. "The hotel says you cancelled all our rooms." Linda turned her head slowly and offered a small, almost gentle smile. "Good morning to you too, Sarah." Her voice was steady, controlled, like a teacher addressing a restless class. "This is ridiculous," Sarah snapped, taking a step forward. "We're your family. You can't just..." "Family?" Linda interrupted softly. "That's an interesting word." Matthew, who had been standing slightly behind his wife, shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," he said in a lower tone, "there must be some mistake. Come down to the front desk with me, we'll clear it up." Linda reached into the pocket of her blazer and pulled out her phone. "No mistake," she said, holding it up. "I cancelled the rooms because you're no longer invited on this trip. This is no longer your vacation." Daniel's mouth fell open. "What are you talking about?" "We thought," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Linda walked a few steps closer, the soft click of her shoes the only sound in the room. "I also thought," she said quietly, "that this was a family trip. I thought you invited me. I thought we were mending things." She stopped in front of Daniel and looked him in the eyes. "Then I saw this." She turned the phone screen toward them. The group chat Summer Freedom glowed bright against the dim interior of the room. Messages scrolled up like evidence in a courtroom: "Let the old lady pay, we'll take over the booking later." "No more whining all week." Sarah's face drained of color. Matthew reached out a tentative hand but let it drop. Daniel stared at the screen, his lips trembling as if searching for a word he'd lost. That's not what it looks like," Matthew muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Linda tilted her head. "Isn't it?" The silence was thick now, punctuated only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Even little Emily, who had crept into a corner of the couch, sensed the gravity of the moment, hugging a stuffed dolphin to her chest and looking at her grandmother with wide, confused eyes. "I gave up nearly a year of my life to make this trip happen," Linda said, her voice trembling but not breaking. "I sold my ring, I took on tutoring, I baked pies until midnight. All because I believed we could be a family again. And you called me a burden." She straightened and let the phone drop to her side. "So no. There is no mistake. The rooms are cancelled. You're free to book your own hotel now." For a long moment nobody moved. Sarah's eyes flicked down. Matthew rubbed his forehead. Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The only one who dared to speak was Emily, whispering, "Grandma?" Linda turned to her, her expression softening for the first time. "It's all right, sweetheart," she murmured. "Grandma's just telling the truth." No one else could meet her gaze. The verdict had been delivered. The room felt smaller now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on the four adults standing before Linda. The light pouring in from the large window picked up flecks of dust in the air, turning them into slow-falling glitter. Daniel was the first to speak, his voice cracking under the strain. "Mom, you can't just leave us like this," he pleaded, stepping forward with both palms open as if reaching for a truce. "Think about the kids." Linda tilted her head, her silver hair catching the sunlight, her expression unreadable. "The kids?" she repeated softly. "You mean the same kids you were planning to hand off to a babysitter so you wouldn't have to deal with me?" Her words landed like a stone thrown into still water. Matthew went pale, his lips parting but no sound coming out. Sarah dropped into the armchair with a soft thud, pressing her fingers to her temples. "This is insane," she muttered. "You're blowing everything up." Linda took a breath, feeling the weight of all the nights she'd worked late, the pies she'd baked, the lessons she'd taught just to scrape together enough for this vacation. Her voice stayed calm but firm. "No, Sarah. I'm not blowing anything up. The truth is, this family has been crumbling for years. I just stopped holding up the pieces for you." She reached for the folder on the side table and tapped it with her fingers. "The hotel has already packed your belongings. A taxi is waiting outside. You will need to find another hotel tonight, and you will pay for it yourselves." She let the words sink in. There is no second option. Sarah shot up from the chair, her face flushed red. "You're destroying this family," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. Linda turned to her slowly, her eyes sharp but wet at the corners. "No, Sarah," she said quietly, "this family destroyed itself when it decided I was nothing but a burden." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Matthew rubbed at the back of his neck, staring at the carpet. Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hands falling uselessly at his sides. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner. Then Linda's gaze softened as she turned toward Emily, who was sitting silently on the couch clutching her stuffed dolphin, eyes shining with unshed tears. Linda crouched down to her level. "Sweetheart," she asked gently, "would you like to stay with Grandma?" Emily sniffled and nodded, her small hands tightening around the toy. "Yes, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. Linda's heart ached as she opened her arms and gathered the little girl into a hug, feeling the warmth and tremble of her tiny body. For a moment, the steel in her spine softened, replaced by a rush of maternal tenderness. She pressed her cheek to Emily's hair, breathing in the faint scent of chlorine from the pool. But when she looked up again at the adults, her resolve returned. "This isn't revenge," she said firmly. "This is a boundary. And it's long overdue." No one answered. Outside the window, the taxi driver leaned against his car, checking his watch. Inside, the truth hung in the air, undeniable and heavy, like the final note of a long, sad song. The air in the suite felt heavy, as if every unspoken word had thickened it. Linda stood near the window, her hands resting on the handle of her worn leather suitcase. Beyond the glass, the Charles River shimmered under the noon sun, sailboats dotting its surface like scattered paper cutouts. She took a slow breath, bracing herself. This was the moment she had dreaded and prepared for at the same time. Matthew's voice broke the silence first. He stepped forward, his jaw tight, eyes glistening. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "if we leave like this, things will never be the same." The sound of his words carried a weight of regret, but also of disbelief, as though he still expected her to change her mind. Linda turned to face him fully, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, the same way she had when he was a boy frightened of storms. "Matthew," she said softly but firmly, "things haven't been the same for a very long time. You just didn't want to see it." Her thumb gave a small, comforting stroke on his sleeve before she let go. Sarah stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her foot tapping on the marble floor. She smirked, but her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Don't expect us to come back to you when you're lonely," she snapped, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. It was a jab meant to wound. But Linda only tilted her head, eyes calm. "Sarah," she said, I would rather be alone than stay with people who see me as a burden. Her tone wasn't angry, only heartbreakingly steady, like a door closing slowly but surely. That steadiness unsettled Sarah more than any shouting could have. Daniel shifted from foot to foot, his gaze fixed on the carpet pattern instead of his mother's eyes. His lips parted once, twice, but no words came out. The man who ran a busy restaurant couldn't summon a single sentence here. Finally, he just lowered his head, shoulders slumping in defeat. From the corner of the room, a small voice cut through the tension like a blade. Emily clutched her stuffed dolphin to her chest and looked up at her parents, her eyes wide and wet. "Grandma is family," she whispered. "What about you, Mommy? Daddy?" The question hung in the air, impossibly light and impossibly heavy at once. It sliced through the adults' defenses in a way no accusation could. No one spoke. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. For a moment, all that existed was the sound of the child's breathing and Linda's steady heartbeat in her own ears. Linda finally moved. She bent down, zipped the last pocket of her suitcase with a deliberate motion, and straightened up. Her movements were calm, but her chest rose and fell a little quicker than usual. "Come on, sweetheart," she said gently to Emily. "We're leaving soon." She gave one last glance at her grown children, a mixture of sadness, resolve, and a hint of relief flickered across her face. She reached for the suitcase handle, the weight of it solid and real in her grasp, just like her decision. Behind her, Matthew swallowed hard. Sarah stared at the floor. Daniel wiped a hand over his mouth, but still said nothing. Linda looked at them one final time, her eyes soft but unwavering. "Take care of yourselves," she said quietly. "I'll be fine." Then she turned back toward the door, her heart heavy but strangely lighter than it had felt in years, ready to step into the hallway and into a new chapter of her life. A soft knock broke the tense silence. Tap, tap, tap. Olivia Brown's calm voice drifted through the door. "Mrs. Parker, your taxi is here whenever you're ready." The gentle professionalism in her tone contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions inside the suite. Linda straightened her back, one hand still gripping the handle of her suitcase. The room smelled faintly of the expensive room service breakfast her children had ordered but left untouched on the coffee table. She took a steadying breath and turned toward them. Her voice was firm but not raised. "All of you, go down to the lobby and collect your bags. The hotel staff will help you arrange another place to stay." Sarah's face flushed crimson. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble tiles. "You can't take our daughter away like this," she burst out, her voice quivering somewhere between anger and panic. Linda crouched down so she was at eye level with Emily, who stood quietly clutching her dolphin plush. The girl's small fingers trembled, but her chin was lifted bravely. "Sweetheart," Linda said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind Emily's ear, "you're just coming with Grandma for a few days. After that, you can decide what you want. No one is forcing you." Her voice broke a little at the end, but she smiled to reassure the child. Emily glanced at her parents. Sarah's lips were pressed in a thin line, Daniel's eyes darted nervously between his wife and his mother. Emily's own voice came out barely above a whisper but carried the clarity of truth. "Grandma," she said, "I want to go with you." Daniel's shoulders jerked as if he'd been slapped. "Emily," he stammered, you can't just," he stopped himself, swallowing hard. Emily looked down at the plush dolphin and spoke again, this time to her father. "You and Mommy lied to Grandma. You used her." Her words landed heavier than any adult accusation. The room went still. Linda rose slowly, her knees stiff but her grip on Emily's hand firm and warm. She reached for the handle of her suitcase with the other hand and rolled it toward the door. "Come on, darling," she murmured, squeezing Emily's fingers. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at her grown children. Her eyes shone with both sadness and dignity. "I hope," she said quietly but clearly, "that one day you understand the value of respect." Her words hung in the air like the final note of a song. Sarah turned away, blinking rapidly. Daniel's hands fell limply to his sides. No one moved to stop them. Linda opened the door, and Olivia stood waiting in the hallway, a sympathetic smile on her face. Together, grandmother and granddaughter stepped out into the corridor, the sound of the suitcase wheels rolling softly behind them. Linda's heart ached, but with every step she felt a weight lifting, replaced by something steadier, freedom, perhaps, or self-respect. Emily's small hand squeezed hers tighter, and Linda whispered, "We'll be okay, sweetheart. We'll be okay." The elevator doors slid shut with a soft chime, sealing Linda and Emily into a quiet metal box that hummed as it descended. The faint music from the hotel's lobby system floated through the speakers, a piano piece Linda vaguely remembered from her teaching days. Emily stood close, her small hand gripping the hem of Linda's jacket. Linda wrapped an arm around her granddaughter, pulling her in gently. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered, lowering her head so their eyes met. Emily pressed her cheek against Linda's shoulder, her dolphin plush wedged between them. "I'm sad for Mommy and Daddy," she murmured, "but I'm proud of you, Grandma." Her voice cracked on the last word. Linda's heart twisted. She stroked the girl's hair softly, inhaling the scent of the vanilla shampoo she had bought her last Christmas. "Thank you, darling," she said, her own voice unsteady. "You don't know how much that means." The elevator dinged and opened into the sunlit lobby. The marble floor gleamed under the tall windows, fresh flowers stood in crystal vases at the check-in desk. The air smelled of coffee from the cafe corner. Olivia Brown waited near the revolving doors, a slim folder in her hand. Her eyes met Linda's with quiet admiration. "Mrs. Parker," she said warmly, "it's been an honor helping you. What you did today, it took a lot of courage." Linda gave a small smile, shaking her head. "It wasn't courage, Olivia," she replied softly. "It was survival." She shifted her suitcase to her other hand, feeling the weight of it and everything it symbolized. Emily looked up curiously at the two women, sensing the gravity but not all the details. Through the tall glass windows, Linda saw her grown children scattered across the driveway outside, their designer luggage piled beside them. Matthew had a phone pressed to his ear, pacing back and forth. Daniel was scrolling furiously, searching for available hotels. Sarah stood still, arms crossed, her lips moving as if in silent prayer or muttered curses. The sight sent a pang through Linda's chest, not triumph, but a bittersweet ache. For years, she had pictured family vacations ending in hugs and group photos, not like this. Emily tugged at her sleeve. "Grandma, where are we going now?" she asked softly, eyes wide. Linda bent down, their foreheads nearly touching. "We're going somewhere," she said, "where I can just be me without having to apologize for existing." She brushed a thumb across Emily's cheek, wiping away a stray tear. "Someplace where we can start fresh." Olivia opened the glass door for them, the summer breeze from the Charles River spilling into the lobby. Outside, the taxi engine purred at the curb, sunlight glinting off its roof. Linda guided Emily forward, her suitcase wheels clicking softly over the tile. As they stepped out, Emily rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder, her small frame relaxing for the first time all day. Linda took one last glance back through the hotel's doors, at the lobby where she had been invisible for so long, at her children's frantic faces beyond the glass. Then she exhaled slowly and turned toward the waiting cab. The Boston sun was brilliant on the pavement, the air full of possibility. She opened the car door, helped Emily climb in, and followed, the door closing with a soft, final thud. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Linda reached for Emily's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "This is the beginning of something new," she whispered, watching the skyline roll by. The taxi merged onto Starr Drive, the city slowly giving way to a ribbon of green parks and the shimmering expanse of the Charles River. Sunlight danced on the water like fragments of broken glass, and Linda watched it through the window, her reflection pale but resolute. Her fingers rested lightly on Emily's small hand, the soft skin a reminder of everything she still had to protect. As the skyline of Boston receded behind them, a lifetime of memories drifted forward in her mind. 30 years of teaching flashed like a reel, chalk dust on her fingers, rows of little faces looking up at her, the late nights spent over 2,500 math tests under a dim kitchen lamp. 40 years of being a single mother, the double shifts, the school recitals she almost missed but never did, the birthdays stretched on a shoestring budget. She didn't regret loving her children, she regretted forgetting to love herself. The thought came with a quiet pang, but not bitterness. Just truth. Emily shifted next to her, still clutching the dolphin plush but leaning comfortably against her grandmother's side. "Grandma," she asked softly, tilting her face upward, "do you regret it?" "Everything?" The child's voice was fragile, almost afraid of the answer. Linda squeezed her hand, feeling the pulse of both their lives in that grip. "I regret one thing, sweetheart," she said, her voice low but steady. "I regret not doing this sooner." A small smile curved on her lips. "But we're doing it now." Emily's eyes shone, and she let out a tiny sigh of relief. Outside the window, the signs began to change, green highway markers pointing toward Cape Cod. The city noise faded into the hush of coastal roads, lined with pine trees and glimpses of open water. Linda had made the reservation early that morning after her meeting with Olivia, a quiet, hopeful plan taking shape as the chaos unfolded upstairs. 2 hours later, the taxi turned onto a narrow lane where hydrangeas bloomed in blue and white along white picket fences. The car slowed in front of a small clapboard inn with a carved wooden sign swaying gently in the breeze, Seaside Inn. Its paint was a little faded, but the porch chairs were bright, and a string of shells clinked softly in the wind. The sight felt like a deep breath after years of holding one's lungs tight. Linda stepped out first, rolling her suitcase over the gravel path. She inhaled the salt air, briny, alive, and so different from the hotel's perfumed lobby. Emily hopped out beside her, eyes wide at the sight of the ocean beyond, just a short walk away. "It smells like summer," she giggled, the first real laugh Linda had heard from her all day. Inside, the innkeeper, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, handed them a brass key attached to a piece of driftwood. "Room 4, ocean view," she said. "Dinner's at 6. We make a mean clam chowder." Linda smiled, feeling something in her chest unclench. She crouched to Emily's level and brushed a strand of hair from her granddaughter's forehead. "Here," she said softly, "we'll have dinner, build sandcastles, and remember what family really feels like." Emily nodded, slipping her hand back into Linda's. They walked up the creaky wooden stairs together, the scent of baked bread and sea air following them. For the first time in years, Linda felt no rush, no apology, no invisible weight. Only the quiet, expansive sense of freedom and, at last, peace. That evening at the Seaside Inn, the dining room smelled of warm bread and simmering clam chowder. Wooden tables were set with simple white cloths and mason jars filled with wildflowers. Linda and Emily sat by the window, where the last rays of sun spilled across the water, turning the waves a soft rose gold. Emily dipped a spoon into her soup and giggled. "It tastes like the sea," she whispered. Linda smiled, her shoulders finally loosening as she tasted her own. After dinner they walked barefoot along the beach, the sand still warm under their feet. Emily ran ahead to chase the tide, then came back to hold her grandmother's hand. Linda tilted her face toward the darkening sky, listening to the gulls and the distant sound of a buoy bell. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about unpaid bills, unreturned calls, or unspoken resentments. She was just there, a woman, a grandmother, a person worthy of her own life. They stopped near the water's edge. Emily drew a heart in the sand and wrote family inside it. Linda's eyes stung, but her heart felt light. She knelt and wrote next to it, respect. Together they watched as the gentle waves lapped closer but didn't quite erase the words. This story began with a woman who sacrificed everything for her family and ended with her choosing herself, not out of anger but out of dignity. It's a reminder that love without respect becomes a burden, and that sometimes the bravest act is to walk away so healing can begin. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need its message, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Leave a comment below saying "I'm listening" so we can stay connected and walk through these journeys together. See you in the next video.